Captain Li Haiyan felt sweat drop down his back as he walked into the giant crystal building. The Galactic Council chamber was bigger than any human structure he had ever seen. The walls were made of glowing blue crystal that hurt his eyes when he looked at them. Two long alien voices echoed around him, speaking in languages that sounded like music or screaming, or both. Had been to many dangerous places in his 30 years as a starship captain. He had fought pirates near Jupiter. He had rescued colonists from burning planets. He had even survived 3 different alien plagues, but nothing prepared him for this moment. Standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, knowing they were about to destroy humanity forever. The Council members sat on floating platforms high above the floor. Their bodies were so different from humans that Li Haiyan sometimes forgot they were alive. The Vorthik looked like giant purple snakes with too many eyes. The Nexari were living crystals that sang when they moved. The Keth had blue skin and tentacles where their arms should be. There were dozens of other species all staring down at the small group of humans. Ambassador Park Mina stood beside Captain Li Haiyan. She was the smartest person. He knew she could speak 15 alien languages and had spent her whole life trying to make peace between humans and other species. Now she looked tired and defeated. Her usually perfect hair was messy, and her diplomatic uniform had wrinkles. She had been fighting for humanity for 3 months, but today she knew she had lost counsel. Leader Vex Tar was a Vorthik whose purple scales were darker than the others. He was old even by alien standards, and his voice sounded like rocks grinding together. When he spoke, every creature in the chamber became silent. The translation devices in the humans' ears crackled to life. Your species has been judged, Vex Tar said. The words hit Li Haiyan like a punch to the stomach. Humanity is too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous for civilized space. We have decided that humans must leave the inner systems forever. The chamber erupted in alien voices. Some were celebrating. Others seemed surprised. A few sounded angry, but not angry enough to help humans. Li Haiyan clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. He knew that any aggressive move would only prove their point about human violence. Park Mina stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but Li Haiyan could see her hands shaking. Honored Council, she said. We request the right to present evidence in our defense. Humans have contributed much to galactic civilization. We have shared our medical knowledge. We have defended trade routes from pirates. We have silenced Vex Tar, interrupted, his voice like thunder. The evidence has been reviewed. Human military actions on Kepler 442b resulted in the deaths of 3,000 alien civilians. Human warships destroyed 17 pirate vessels when capture would have been sufficient. Human colonies have repeatedly violated environmental protection treaties. The pattern is clear. Humans solve problems with violence. Li Haiyan wanted to scream. The pirates they destroyed had been attacking civilian ships for months. The Galactic Council had done nothing. The environmental violations were accidents caused by outdated equipment that other species refused to help them upgrade. And the incident on Kepler 442b had been self-defense when alien miners attacked human settlements. But he said nothing. He knew that anything he said would be twisted and used against humanity. The decision had been made before they even entered this chamber. This trial was just for show. The council leader continued. You have 30 standard days to evacuate all human presence from inner rim systems. All humans must retreat beyond the frontier line. No human ship will be permitted to cross this boundary again. Any violation will be met with immediate military response. 30 days. Li Haiyan thought about the millions of humans living on dozens of worlds, families who had built homes and businesses, people who had never known any other life. Some colonies had been established for over a century. How could they evacuate everyone in 30 days? Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood behind the other humans. He was the commander of the 3rd Fleet and one of the few military officers the council had allowed to attend this hearing. His face showed no emotion, but Li Haiyan knew him well enough to see the fury burning in his eyes. The admiral was already making plans. Li Haiyan was sure of it. Dr. Yoon Hae-ri was there too. She was the lead scientist for the Human Research Consortium. Her life work studying alien technology would be destroyed if they were banished. She had discovered cures for diseases and developed new energy sources. All of that would be lost. But she stood straight and proud, refusing to show weakness in front of the aliens who were destroying her career. The Galactic Council had other complaints too. They said humans were too curious, always exploring where they should not go. They said humans bred too fast and would overpopulate the galaxy. They said human emotions were unstable and made them dangerous allies. But Li Haiyan knew the real reason for the banishment: fear. The other species were afraid of humanity. In the 200 years since first contact, humans had gone from primitive planet dwellers to major players in galactic politics. They had built cities on hostile worlds where other species said was impossible. They had solved engineering problems that had stumped alien scientists for centuries. They had fought wars that others thought were unwinnable. The Vorthek had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. The Nexari controlled most of the trade routes. The Keth dominated scientific research. They had created a system where everyone knew their place and followed the rules. Humans did not fit into this system. They asked too many questions and refused to accept that something was impossible. President Choi Jae-soon was attending the hearing through a communication link from Earth. His image flickered on the chamber wall as the quantum signal struggled. "Across interstellar space, we accept the Council ruling," he said finally, though his voice was filled with pain. "We will comply with the evacuation order." Li Haiyan felt his heart sink. The president had no choice. Refusing would mean war, and humanity could not fight the entire galaxy. But accepting meant abandoning everything they had built. In space, as the council session ended, Li Haiyan caught Admiral Kim Tae-ho's eye. The admiral gave him a tiny nod. It was a signal they had arranged beforehand. If the ruling went against humanity, they would implement Plan 7 Li Haiyan had helped write. Plan 7 during secret military meetings. It was their backup plan for the worst-case scenario. Humans were escorted from the chamber by floating security drones. As they walked through the crystal corridors, Park Mina finally spoke. "This is not the end," she whispered to Li Haiyan. "It is the beginning." She was right, Li Haiyan realized. The Galactic Council thought they were solving a problem by banishing humanity to the Outer Rim, but they were actually creating a much bigger problem. The Outer Rim was vast and mostly unexplored. It contained resources and opportunities that the Council species had ignored because they thought it was too dangerous. Humans specialized in doing things that others thought were too dangerous. Back on their transport ship, Li Haiyan contacted Admiral Kim Tae-ho on a secure channel. "Are you thinking what I am thinking?" he asked. Admiral smiled for the first time in months. "The Outer Rim is about to become very interesting," he replied. Within hours of the ruling, emergency meetings began on every human world. Military commanders, scientists, and political leaders worked frantically to turn 30 days of chaos into the beginning of something unprecedented. The greatest migration in human history was about to begin, and at the end of that migration, humanity would emerge stronger than ever. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood on the bridge of the battleship Seoul, watching the most incredible sight in human history. Thousands of ships are stretched across space like a metal river, flowing toward the unknown. Every type of vessel that could fly was part of the Exodus. Ancient colony ships that should have been scrapped decades ago. Transport vessels packed with desperate families. Military warships protecting the convoy. Cargo haulers carrying the stripped remains of entire worlds. The sight filled him with both pride and terror. Pride because humanity had come together like never before. Terror because he knew how dangerous the journey ahead would be. The Outer Rim was called a wasteland for good reasons. No major species had ever tried to colonize it permanently. The few explorers who ventured there either came back with stories of deadly phenomena or never came back at all. 8 months, Admiral Kim thought to himself. 8 months to cross the void between civilized space and the frontier. Most of the civilians had no idea what they were really facing. They thought this was just a long trip to a new home. They did not understand that the Outer Rim might kill them all. Captain Oh Soo-jin, commanded the transport vessel Bison, one of the largest civilian ships in the convoy. Her ship carried 12,000 people, mostly families with children. The Bison had been a luxury liner before the banishment. Now every deck was crammed with refugees sleeping in converted storage rooms and emergency shelters. Captain knew that keeping morale up was as important as keeping the engines running. She organized daily activities for the children. Schools were set up in the cargo bays, where teachers tried to continue education. Despite the cramped conditions, entertainment programs helped adults forget their fears for a few hours. Each evening she would broadcast messages of hope and encouragement throughout the ship, but privately Captain worried constantly. The Bison was old and had never been designed for such a long journey. Strange vibrations had started in the engine room 3 weeks ago. The water recycling systems were working at maximum capacity. Food supplies were carefully rationed and would barely last until they reached their destination. If anything went seriously wrong, thousands of people would die. Dr. Yang Min, Ho spent most of the journey studying sensor data from their destination systems. He was the expedition chief xenobiologist, and his job was to figure out what they would find when they arrived. The preliminary scans were both exciting and terrifying. Several worlds showed signs of life, but also evidence of massive structures that clearly were not natural. The data puzzled him greatly. Some of the readings made no sense according to known physics. Energy signatures appeared and disappeared without explanation. Gravitational anomalies suggested the presence of technology far beyond human understanding. Whatever had built those structures was probably more advanced than any known species, including the Galactic Council races. Dr. Yang kept most of his concerns to himself. The last thing the Exodus fleet needed was panic about alien superweapons or ancient death traps, but he filed detailed reports for Admiral Kim and began preparing his team for discoveries that might change everything humans thought they knew about the universe. The first major crisis came during the 4th month. Engineer Lee So-young was working in the engine room of the cargo hauler Daegu when catastrophic failure struck. The ship's primary fusion reactor began overloading, and there was no way to shut it down safely. 3,000 people were about to die in a nuclear explosion. Lee So-young made a decision that would make her a legend. The only way to prevent disaster was to manually vent the reactor core into space. But doing so required someone to spacewalk between ships during an ion storm that was raging through the system. The radiation would be lethal within minutes. She put on an environmental suit and launched herself into the void between the Daegu and the repair ship. Incheon, the ion storm turned space into a light show of deadly beauty. Purple and green energy danced around her as she fought to reach the external reactor controls. Her suit radiation alarms screamed warnings that she ignored working. With freezing hands inside thick gloves, Lee So-young managed to connect the emergency venting system. Reactor core ejected safely into space, saving 3,000 lives. But the radiation exposure was too much. Her body had absorbed a fatal dose. She died 2 hours later in the Incheon Medical Bay. The entire fleet held memorial services for Engineer Lee So-young. Admiral Kim declared that the first permanent settlement in the Outer Rim would be named in her honor. Her sacrifice reminded everyone that they were not just refugees fleeing persecution. They were pioneers risking everything to build something new. As they pushed deeper into unexplored space, strange things began happening throughout the fleet. Ships reported unusual energy readings that did not match any known phenomena. Some crew members claimed to see impossible lights dancing between the stars. Others reported dreams that felt more real than reality. Dreams of vast cities and alien voices speaking in languages that somehow made sense. Lieutenant Commander Baek Min-soo was the fleet intelligence officer responsible for investigating these reports. What he found disturbed him greatly. Strange experiences were happening to people throughout the fleet, but always to those with the highest intelligence scores. Scientists, engineers, and senior officers were having similar visions of ancient technology and abandoned worlds. Baek Min Sue compiled classified reports about the phenomena, but Admiral Kim ordered them buried. The fleet was already struggling with equipment failures and supply shortages, adding fears about alien mind control or supernatural forces would destroy morale completely. Whatever was happening in the deep void would have to wait until they reached safety. Outer Rim revealed itself slowly, at first dead star systems with nothing but rocks and ice, vast nebulae that interfered with navigation equipment, empty space that seemed to stretch forever. But gradually they began encountering wonders that no human had ever imagined: star clusters arranged in perfect geometric patterns, planets with rings made of what looked like metal space stations the size of moons drifting, abandoned through the void. When long-range sensors finally detected their destination system, a cheer went up throughout the entire fleet. 7 planets orbited a stable yellow star much like Earth's sun. Initial scans showed that at least 3 of the worlds might be habitable. The system seemed perfect for human colonization, but as they approached it, became clear they were not the first to discover this place. Massive structures drifted in the outer system, clearly artificial, but built by no known species. Some were larger than human cities. Others had shapes that hurt to look at directly. All of them were clearly very, very old. Dr. Yang Min Ho studied the readings with growing excitement and fear. Whatever civilization had built these structures possessed technology that made human science look primitive. The good news was that all the structures appeared to be inactive and abandoned. The bad news was that something had happened to their builders, something that left behind only empty monuments in the void. Captain Park Young Sik commanded the advanced scout ships that would make first contact with the new system. His job was to ensure the area was safe before the main fleet arrived. As his ships approached the largest planet, he could see massive ruins covering entire continents. Cities that must have housed billions of beings were now nothing but empty shells. The planet atmosphere was breathable for humans, and the gravity was only slightly higher than Earth. The ruins showed no signs of recent activity, but they were clearly the product of an incredibly advanced civilization. The architecture was both beautiful and alien, with flowing curves and impossible angles that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Park Young Sik made the historic transmission back to the fleet. "The system is secure," he reported. "We have found humanity new home, but we are not the first to live here." Admiral Kim Tae-ho received the message on the Bridge of the Soul. As he looked out at the thousands of ships following him into this ancient system, he felt the weight of history. The Galactic Council had banished humanity, thinking they would disappear into the darkness. Instead, they had found something that might make them stronger than any species in the galaxy. The Great Migration was almost over, but humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning. Commander Park Young Sik felt the alien wind hit his face as he stepped onto the surface of what would become New Soul. The red soil crunched under his boots, and the sky above was the color of copper. 2 suns hung in the heavens, casting strange shadows that moved in ways that Earth shadows never did. But the air was breathable, and that was all that mattered. Behind him, the first wave of colonists emerged from their landing craft. They carried prefabricated habitat modules and construction equipment, everything they needed to start building humanity new home. The ancient alien ruins stretched across the horizon like a dead city, but Park Young Sik tried not to think about what had happened to the beings who built them. Within hours, the first human structures began rising from the alien soil. Chief Engineer Jang Yoon-ji directed the construction teams with military precision. She had built settlements on hostile worlds before, but never on a planet that felt so alive with ancient mysteries. Every time her crews dug foundations, they found fragments of alien technology metal that stayed cool no matter how hot the sun got. Crystals that glowed when touched by human hands. The ruins were everywhere. Some were small buildings that might have been homes. Others were massive towers that disappeared into the clouds. The biggest structures were underground, vast chambers that seemed to go down forever. Most were empty, but some contained that made even the bravest colonists nervous. Machines that hummed with power despite being millions of years old. walls covered with symbols that seemed to move when nobody was looking. Dr. Kanzio Jin was the lead archaeologist, and she treated the ruins like the greatest treasure in the galaxy. Every day she led teams deeper into the alien structures, mapping chambers and cataloging artifacts. Her excitement was infectious, but so was her caution. She had seen what happened to explorers who got careless around alien technology. 3 members of her team had disappeared in the first month. Their bodies were never found. The breakthrough came during the 4th month of colonization. Dr. Kang's team had been exploring what appeared to be an ancient spaceport buried under centuries of sediment. Deep beneath the main structure, they found a chamber unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were covered with crystalline panels that pulsed with soft blue light. Dr. Yoon Hae Ri was called in to examine the crystals. She was the expedition lead computer scientist and had experience with alien data systems. But these crystals were beyond anything in human experience. They seemed to contain vast amounts of information stored in ways that human technology could barely detect. For weeks, Dr. Yoon's team worked to crack the crystal encryption. They built new interfaces and wrote programs that pushed human computers to their limits. Slowly, patterns began emerging from the alien data, mathematical sequences that described star systems, physical constants that matched universal laws. The crystals contained a database, but a database built by minds that thought in ways completely different from humans. The breakthrough came when Dr. Yoon realized that the crystals were not just storing information, they were actively trying to communicate. The database was designed to teach its contents to whoever found it. The alien builders had left behind a gift for future civilizations. What they learned changed everything. Crystals contained the complete history of the Outer Rim previous inhabitants. They called themselves the Architects, and they had built an interstellar civilization that spanned thousands of star systems. Their technology was so advanced that they could reshape planets and move stars. The database showed the locations of resource-rich worlds, strategic choke points, and hidden dangers throughout the Outer Rim. More importantly, the database revealed why the Architects had vanished. They had not been destroyed by war or natural disaster. They had simply evolved beyond the need for physical existence millions of years ago. They had uploaded their consciousness into pure energy and departed for dimensions beyond normal space. They left behind their technology as a legacy for whoever might follow. Admiral Song-woo Jin received the star charts with excitement that he tried to hide behind military professionalism. The data showed him dozens of worlds rich in rare metals, gas giants perfect for fuel extraction, and asteroid belts containing enough raw materials to build 1,000 fleets. He immediately began planning expeditionary missions to claim these resources before anyone else discovered them. The expansion happened faster than anyone had imagined possible. Within 6 months, human settlements existed in 12 star systems. Each new colony was built around architect ruins that provided both shelter and technology. The colonists learned to adapt alien machines to human needs, power generators that drew energy from quantum fluctuations, manufacturing systems that could build anything if given the right raw materials. The shipyards at New Bizin became the center of humanity military renaissance. Captain Lim the Jin pioneered new ship designs that combined human engineering with adapted architect technology. The results were vessels faster and more powerful than anything the Galactic Council had ever seen. Human ships could now travel between star systems in days rather than weeks. Their weapons could punch through energy shields that had protected alien fleets for centuries. But the most important discovery was not technological, it was social. As humanity expanded through the Outer Rim, they encountered other species, refugee races that had been cast out by the Galactic Council, pirates and outcasts who had nowhere else to go, ancient civilizations that had hidden in the deep void for millennia. The first to make contact were the Kalari, a peaceful species that had been displaced when the Council reorganized trade routes. Their homeworld had been given to a Council member species, and they had been wandering space for decades, looking for a new home. The Kalari were master farmers who could grow food in environments where other species would starve. General Shin Dong Hyuk was skeptical when the Kalari requested permission to settle on the agricultural world of New Jeju. But President Lee Yong-mi, who had been elected leader of the growing Terran Outer Rim Alliance, saw an opportunity. The Kalari could help feed humanity expanding population in exchange for protection from Council forces. Integration worked better than anyone expected. Kalari agricultural techniques increased food production by 300%. Human military protection allowed the Kalari to build permanent settlements for the first time in decades. Both species benefited, and a precedent was established. The Outer Rim would be built on cooperation, not conquest. The Threks were different, former pirates who had been cast out by their own clans for being too violent even by pirate standards. They arrived in stolen ships offering their services as mercenaries. Admiral Song Woo-jin wanted to turn them away, but General Shin Dong-hyuk saw their potential. The Threks were natural fighters with an instinctive understanding of space combat. Their ships were crude but effective, and their crews feared nothing. Human officers provided discipline and strategy, while Threks warriors provided aggression and courage. The mixed units that resulted were devastatingly effective. More species followed the Vec, refugees from a dead world who were master engineers, the Sil nomads who knew secret hyperspace routes through dangerous nebulae, the core, ancient guardians of forbidden knowledge who emerged from hidden bases to join humanity, cause each brought unique skills and knowledge that made the Alliance stronger. Within 3 years, the Terran Outer Rim Alliance controlled 50 star systems and commanded the loyalty of dozens of species. Council species had dismissed the Outer Rim as worthless wasteland, but humanity had turned it into the foundation of a new kind of civilization, one based on merit rather than birth, cooperation rather than dominance. The foundation of humanity empire was built on the simple idea that anyone willing to work and fight for freedom deserved a place in their society. It was a sharp contrast to the Council rigid hierarchies where species were ranked by age and power. The Outer Rim attracted every being in the galaxy who wanted something better, and at the center of it all were the humans, the species that the Galactic Council had tried to eliminate because they were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too willing to fight for what they believed in. Those same qualities that had gotten them banished were now the foundation of their strength. 5 years had passed since the banishment when the inevitable happened. Commodore Zeph Ran of the Nexari Crystal Fleet crossed the frontier line with 12 ships under the pretense of a scientific survey. His crystalline body pulsed with nervous energy as he entered what was supposed to be empty space. Instead, his sensors detected something that made his alien blood run cold. Massive space stations orbited dead asteroids. Mining operations stripped entire moons of their resources. Patrol ships with unfamiliar designs moved through the void with military precision. This was not the scattered refugee camps that Council intelligence had predicted. This was an organized civilization with industrial capacity that rivaled the Inner Systems. Admiral Kwon Jae-min received the alert on the bridge of his flagship Incheon. The long-range sensors had detected the Council ships the moment they crossed into human space. He had been expecting this visit for months. Intelligence reports suggested that the Council was growing concerned about humanity rapid expansion. The time for hiding was over. Human fleet that intercepted the Nexari ships was like nothing Commodore Zeph Ran had ever seen. The vessels were sleek and deadly looking with hull designs that incorporated technology he did not recognize. Their energy signatures were completely alien, suggesting power sources far beyond anything in Council databases. The lead ship transmitted a message in perfect Nexari language. Attention, Council vessels, you are in violation of Terran Alliance space. State your business or prepare to be escorted back across the frontier. Commodore Zeph Ran tried to maintain diplomatic protocol, but his voice betrayed his shock. We are conducting a routine scientific survey under Council authority. All inhabited systems in this region fall under our jurisdiction. The response came immediately, and it chilled him to his crystalline core. This is Admiral Kwon Jae-min of the Terran Outer Rim Alliance Defense Fleet. Your Council has no authority in our space. You have 10 minutes to explain your real purpose. Here are my ships. We'll consider you hostile. The diplomatic meeting that followed was tense. Admiral Kwan agreed to meet aboard the Nexari flagship, but only after establishing clear rules. Both sides could bring 5 representatives. No weapons would be permitted. The meeting would be recorded and transmitted to both governments in real time. Commodore Zeph Ran had expected to find desperate refugees willing to negotiate for basic survival. Instead, he faced a confident military commander who spoke as the representative of a sovereign power. Admiral Kwan wore a uniform that combined human military tradition with alien technology. His bearing suggested someone who had never known defeat. Council demands the right to inspect your colonies for compliance with galactic law. Commodore Zeph Ran began according to his prepared script. All inhabited worlds must be registered with the proper authorities. Admiral Kwan interrupted with a laugh that held no humor. You seem confused, Commodore. This is human space now. We have no colonies here. We have sovereign worlds populated by free citizens. The Council banished us from civilized space. Remember, we accepted that banishment and everything that came with it, including freedom from Council authority. The Nexari officer had not expected this response. His crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. The Council had assumed that humans would be grateful for any contact with the outside galaxy. Instead, they were being treated as unwelcome invaders. Commodore Zeph Ran tried a different approach. Surely, you understand that the Outer Rim contains dangers that require Council oversight. There are ancient ruins here. Technologies that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Admiral Kwan leaned forward, his eyes hard as steel. The only dangerous technology I see here belongs to a Council fleet that crossed into our territory without permission. You have exactly 5 minutes to return to your ships and leave our space. The standoff lasted 3 hours. Both sides knew that the first shot fired would mean war. The Council fleet was powerful, but they were deep in enemy territory. Surrounded by human ships, the Terran vessels were untested, but they had the advantage of numbers and defensive position. The battle began when Commodore Zeph Ran made a fatal mistake. He ordered his ships to power up their weapons, intending to intimidate the humans into backing down. Instead, Admiral Kwan interpreted this as an act of aggression. The human response was swift and overwhelming. First salvo of particle beam weapons tore through the Nexari flagship crystalline hull like it was made of glass. Commodore Zeph Ran watched in horror as his supposedly impenetrable defenses shattered under concentrated fire. The energy shields that had protected Council ships for centuries were useless against weapons that seemed to ignore known physics. Captain Han Bio Rai led the assault shuttles that boarded the crippled Nexari flagship. Her Marines moved through the alien corridors with practiced efficiency. The Nexari crew offered little resistance. They had never been trained for boarding actions against an enemy that refused to follow the established rules of civilized warfare. Intelligence gathered from the captured flagship computers revealed information that changed everything. The Galactic Council was not the unified power. They pretended to be. Several major species were questioning Council authority. Economic problems plagued the inner systems. Trade routes were being disrupted by pirates that Council forces seemed unable to stop. Most importantly, the defeat of a Council fleet had triggered something the leadership had feared for decades. Rebellion. The Mordani had declared independence. The Zephirites were demanding representation in Council decisions. The rigid hierarchy that had ruled the galaxy for millennia was beginning to crack. News of the human victory spread through both human and alien space. President Lee Yong-mi used the triumph to send a clear message to the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the species that could be bullied and banished. They had become something new, something stronger, something that would not bow to alien authority. The Council response was predictably aggressive. Fleet Marshal Kexthor assembled a massive task force of 200 ships from multiple species. His orders were simple: crush the human rebellion before it could inspire others. Demonstrate to the galaxy that challenging Council authority meant destruction. But The Council had made a critical error. They were preparing to fight the humans they remembered. From 5 years ago, desperate refugees with obsolete equipment. Instead, they would face the Terran Outer Rim Alliance, a coalition of species armed with architect technology and unified by a common desire for freedom. Admiral Park Seung-ho received intelligence about the approaching Council fleet while reviewing ship construction reports at the New Soul orbital yards. The enemy force was massive, but it was also composed of ships designed for patrol duties in peaceful systems. Most Council vessels had never been tested in real combat. Against an enemy that fought back, the human fleet that prepared to meet them was different. Every ship had been built for war. Every crew had trained in the asteroid fields and nebulae of the Outer Rim. Every weapon system incorporated technology that the Council scientists had never seen. Human ships could repair themselves in battle. Their weapons could track targets through hyperspace. Their shields could absorb energy attacks and redirect the power to their own systems. More importantly, the humans were no longer alone. The Kalari provided sensor ships that could detect enemy fleets across entire star systems. The Threx contributed fast attack craft, perfect for hit-and-run tactics. Even species that the Council had never heard of emerged from the deep Outer Rim to join humanity because the message was clear to everyone in the galaxy. The age of Council dominance was ending. A new power was rising from the darkness of the Outer Rim. And at its heart were the humans, the species that had been cast out for being too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous. The very qualities that had gotten them banished were about to reshape the galaxy. The asteroid field around Ross 128 had become a graveyard of ships, but Admiral Park Seung-ho felt no satisfaction as he watched the debris drift past his bridge viewport. The final battle had lasted 3 days, and the Terran Outer Rim Alliance had won a complete victory. But victory always came with a price, and the price of freedom was always paid in blood. From the command bridge of the dreadnought Incheon, Admiral Park could see the remains of what had been the largest military fleet ever assembled by the Galactic Council. 200 ships from a dozen species had crossed into human space, intent on crushing the rebellion before it could spread. Now less than half of them remained intact, and most of those were surrendering or fleeing. The battle had been unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Council forces had expected to fight desperate refugees with improvised weapons. Instead, they faced a coordinated defense, involving not just human ships but vessels from species that most Council members had never heard of. The Outer Rim had produced allies that changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Colonel Yu Min-young climbed out of her fighter cockpit with hands that still shook from combat adrenaline. She had led the fighter wings in a series of strikes that crippled 3 Council capital ships. Her pilots had trained in the asteroid fields of New Soul, learning to fight in close quarters where larger ships could not maneuver. The Council pilots had never faced anything like their tactics. Fighter squadrons had been crucial to the victory. Human ships were individually superior to Council vessels, but they were still outnumbered 2 to 1. The fighters had evened the odds by striking at command ships and disrupting enemy formations. Captain No Hyun Su stealth destroyers had also played a vital role, appearing from nowhere to deliver devastating attacks before vanishing back into the void. But the real secret of human victory was something the Council had never understood: unity. Every species in the Terran Alliance fought as if they were defending their own homes, because they were. The Outer Rim had become a place where beings from across the galaxy could build new lives free from the rigid hierarchies that had oppressed them. For centuries, Fleet Marshal Kex Thor had surrendered when his flagship engines failed and his escort ships abandoned him. The proud Vorthek warrior who had commanded Council fleets for decades now sat in a human detention cell, awaiting trial. His defeat had been transmitted across the galaxy in real time, showing everyone that the Council military was not invincible. Captain Ru Su-jin intercepted the communications traffic that followed the battle. Rebellions were erupting across Council space. The Mordani had seized control of 3 star systems. The The Zephyrites had declared independence and were fighting Council forces near their homeworld, even some of the core Council. Species were demanding changes to the ancient power structure. The victory had cost the Alliance dearly as well. 12 human ships had been destroyed, and thousands of crew members had died. The Kalari sensor ship that had provided early warning of the Council attack had been targeted first, and its crew had fought to the last being to keep transmitting tactical data. The Threx attack squadrons had suffered heavy casualties in their suicide runs against Council battleships, but the survivors knew they had witnessed something historic. The rigid order that had controlled the galaxy for 3,000 years was crumbling. The Galactic Council had ruled through fear and overwhelming force. When that force proved insufficient, their authority collapsed like a house of cards. President Lee Young-mi arrived at the battle site, aboard the diplomatic vessel Soul, to address the victorious fleet. Her message was broadcast throughout human space and beyond, to the ears of every being in the galaxy who dreamed of freedom. They banished us thinking we would disappear into the darkness, she said as she looked out at the assembled ships. Instead, we became the darkness, and now we return as masters of it. The Outer Rim was supposed to be our prison. It became our forge. We were cast out as refugees. We return as liberators. The words resonated across the galaxy. Species that had been oppressed by Council rule for centuries saw hope for the first time in their lives. The humans had proven that the Council could be defeated, that there was an alternative to the ancient hierarchies that kept entire civilizations in chains. Admiral Park Seung-ho knew that the victory was just the beginning. The Council still controlled the inner systems and had vast resources at their disposal, but their military reputation was shattered, and their political authority was crumbling. The member species were no longer willing to accept Council dominance without question. The Terran Outer Rim Alliance had evolved from a collection of refugee camps into the galaxy's newest superpower. The ancient architect ruins had provided technology, but it was human determination and ingenuity that had built an empire. The species that the Council had dismissed as too aggressive and unpredictable had proven them right and made those qualities into strengths in the months that followed the victory at Ross 128. The galaxy map was redrawn. The Terran Alliance expanded its influence throughout the Outer Rim, while rebellions and independence movements spread through Council space. The rigid borders that had divided species for millennia began to blur as beings chose their allegiances based on ideals rather than birth. The Kalari established agricultural colonies on dozens of worlds, feeding the growing population of the Alliance. The Threx became the core of the new military forces that protected Alliance space from pirates and slavers. The Vec engineers built shipyards and factories that produced technology beyond anything the Council had imagined. But the most important change was philosophical. The Galactic Council had been built on the idea that some species were naturally superior to others, that hierarchy and obedience were the foundations of civilization. The Terran Alliance proved that cooperation and merit could create something stronger. Dr. Yoon Hae-ri continued her work deciphering architect technology, but now she led teams that included scientists from dozens of species. Collaborative research produced breakthroughs that no single species could have achieved alone. Architect knowledge combined with diverse perspectives created innovations that revolutionized everything from medicine to interstellar travel. The humans had learned something during their exile that the Council species had forgotten: how to adapt, how to overcome impossible odds, how to turn disadvantages into strengths. The Outer Rim had been dismissed as worthless because it was dangerous and unpredictable. But those were exactly the conditions that humans thrived in. As President Lee Young-mi stood on the observation deck of the orbital station above New Soul, she could see the lights of a dozen different species cities spread across the planet's surface. Human settlements nestled beside Kalari farms and Threx warrior compounds. Each species maintained their own culture and traditions, but all were united by common purpose. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of the Galactic Council was ending, replaced by something new and uncertain, the Terran Outer Rim. Alliance was not perfect, but it offered something that the Council never had. Hope for a better future built on freedom rather than fear. The species that had been banished for being too dangerous had become the most powerful force in the galaxy, and they were just getting started. The Outer Rim was vast and full of mysteries. The Architect ruins held secrets that could reshape reality itself, and humanity had proven that they could turn any challenge into an opportunity. The darkness that had been meant to swallow them had instead become their greatest weapon. Now they were bringing that darkness back to the sea. Galaxy as a gift of liberation for all who were brave enough to seize it.